Donald Trump is preparing to take office as President of the United States once again, and the world is watching closely. Ukraine, Gaza, Taiwan, and China. There are a range of big global challenges awaiting the new president and his foreign policy team. India is also one of the countries watching the incoming Trump administration closely to decode whether Donald Trump and his foreign policy team will work closely with India. So far, there seems to be only good news. Florida Senator Marco Rubio seems set to become Trump's Secretary of State, while Congressman Mike Waltz has been picked as the new National Security Advisor. Both men are strong advocates of a closer relationship with India and will be a key part of the new Trump administration. But who exactly will form Trump 2.0? What do they believe? And will Trump end up being good or bad for India? Those are the questions we're going to ask on this episode of Threadbare. So let's start with the big headlines. Reports indicate that Senator Marco Rubio of Florida will be Trump's Secretary of State, which is basically America's foreign minister. And Congressman Mike Waltz will be Donald Trump's National Security Advisor, who is the president's closest advisor on key foreign policy issues. Both men are experienced foreign policy hands who know what they're talking about. Rubio has been a prominent commentator on foreign policy issues in the Senate, while Waltz is a former army officer. But what do their appointments mean for India? First up, Senator Marco Rubio. Rubio recently introduced the US-India Defense Cooperation Act, which is all about bringing the Americans and Indians closer. This act would treat India as a top ally, putting it on the same level as countries like Japan and NATO member countries. In Marco Rubio's vision, this was primarily about countering China's growing influence in Asia. Now, a big part of the reason for this legislation that Marco Rubio suggested was about countering China's growing influence in Asia. This legislation also aims to give India access to advanced US military technology, something that India hasn't always had before. Plus, it even has a clause that could cut off US aid to Pakistan if it is found supporting terrorism against India, which is pretty strong stuff given America's past policy on Pakistan. So Senator Marco Rubio, who could be America's potential top diplomat, has made his views clear. In fact, he made them even clearer during a congressional hearing.
Obviously, there's an element of that, but I think India in and of itself is a nation with incredible potential, and there's incredible potential in our bilateral relationship. So my questions about military exchanges are not towards the desire to use viewing India some sort of surrogate counterbalance to China in the region, but rather one that recognizes what I think is their potential and ultimately their rightful role in South Asia and across the world.
Then there's Congressman Mike Waltz, who actually chaired the India caucus in America's lower house, which is also known as the House of Representatives. Waltz has in the past pushed for a formal alliance with India, which he says would boost security for both nations, in a region where threats from Pakistan and China are always a concern. Waltz also wants to make it easier for the United States to sell military equipment to India, helping strengthen India's defense capabilities. He's also been a critic of Pakistan's use of terrorism as a tool of foreign policy. But it's not just about defense. Waltz also sees India as a key economic partner, especially when it comes to things like critical minerals and technologies, which could help reduce US reliance on China. So, two of Trump's top advisors on foreign policy, Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, are very, very strong voices on India. But they've also called for a strong US policy on China, which they see as America's biggest geopolitical competitor. Rubio has backed legislation to combat forced labor in China, and also to restrict Chinese tech companies like TikTok from operating in the United States due to national security concerns. Meanwhile, Mike Waltz has been vocal about China's alleged unfair trade practices and its influence over global supply chains. He even supported an American boycott of the 2022 Winter Olympics to protest China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims and the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. So all of that is good news for India so far. A number of countries around the world have been really concerned about Donald Trump's return to the White House. But India seems to be pretty confident that it's going to have a good relationship with Trump.
The Prime Minister was among the first 3 calls, I think, that President Trump took. And look, India, one, Prime Minister Modi has actually built rapport across multiple presidents. When he first came to DC, Obama was the president, then it was Trump, then it was Biden. So, for him, there's something natural in terms of how he forges those relationships. So that's helped hugely. And I think, the changes in India have helped as well. I know today a lot of countries are nervous about the US, okay? Let's be honest about it. We are not one of them.
But while the signs are good, the big question is whether Trump 2.0 will turn out to be good or bad for India. Now, on the positive side of the ledger, Trump's choice of Rubio and Waltz indicates that he's going to keep up the pressure on China. This is important for India because US-China tensions have been helpful for India in the past. America's anxiety over Beijing's ambitions in Asia has been a key part of the reason why it has sought closer relationships with India. Also, a brewing US-China trade and economic conflict, while destabilizing to the world, could also push global businesses to invest more in India. A strong policy of American pressure on China, which Rubio and Waltz will push, could be decent news for India. Now, Russia is another key reason why the Trump 2.0 administration could be good for India. Both Waltz and Rubio, as well as Donald Trump himself, want to push for a negotiated end to the Ukraine conflict. Now, this is also in India's interest. It does not want to see a prolonged conflict between Russia and the West. That's because the Ukraine war has pushed Russia, which is a close military and defense partner of India, closer to China. And it has also put India in a difficult spot, since Western nations have wanted India to condemn Moscow for its invasion of Ukraine. But India has maintained a neutral policy. So, an end to the conflict is actually good news for India because it removes this irritant. But while the Trump 2.0 administration has the right idea, it's not absolutely apparent how they're going to bring the war to an end. For example, Mike Waltz has actually suggested providing Ukraine long-range strike weapons that will allow its forces to hit deep inside Russia. Now, this could pressure Vladimir Putin to end the war, but it could also escalate the conflict. That's precisely why President Joe Biden did not provide those weapons to Ukraine. So, there still seems to be some uncertainty on this question of Ukraine. But there's another final factor that makes the Trump administration decent news for India. That's because Donald Trump and his top foreign policy advisors will really try not to comment on India's internal politics. For example, during his first administration between 2017 and 2021, Trump did not make any statements on India's abrogation of Article 370 in Kashmir, the passage of the Citizenship Amendment Act, or the 2020 riots that took place in Delhi. India tends to see American comments on its domestic politics as political interference, and it wasn't happy when the Biden administration commented on the 2024 elections and the tax cases against the opposition Congress party. And finally, the Trump administration has a habit of fighting with allies in Europe as well as Japan and South Korea. These countries are rapidly realizing that they need partners outside of America, and India is one of the countries that they are most likely to turn to for a closer strategic relationship. But for all of these positives, the Trump administration will also likely come with serious problems for India. The biggest concern is instability. Donald Trump can be an unpredictable figure to work with, and his past decisions have actually hurt India. For example, it was Donald Trump who negotiated with the Taliban to pull American troops out of Afghanistan. That was contrary to what India wanted and set the stage for the disastrous US withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. Just a little while later, the Taliban took over the country. And on Iran, Trump undid the nuclear agreement that President Barack Obama signed. He also slapped sanctions on Iran, which stopped India from buying Iranian oil. Prior to that, Iran had been a major supplier of energy and oil to India. And so it was a blow to India's energy security when Iran was taken out of its potential list of countries that it could buy from. Now, all of this instability is just the cost of doing business with Donald Trump. But it has led to big concerns that a Trump 2.0 administration will lead to similarly unpredictable decisions for India. And that will be a big problem. The former president is also very clear about his view on trade, which is very important to India. Trump believes that some countries are taking advantage of America and its open economy, and he wants to punish them. He's also been very clear that India is one of those countries. Trump recently called India a very big abuser of the international trade system. He's also called the country a tariff king. What he means here is that India has often used high import tariffs to protect Indian industries from American competition. Meanwhile, America doesn't have similarly high tariffs. So, Trump and others who share his economic viewpoint want to put pressure on India to reduce those tariffs, which would benefit American companies. Now, Trump is also willing to punish countries to get what he wants. He has promised to slap a 20% tariff on all goods entering the United States. And while this could just be a negotiating tactic, India does over $100 billion in goods trade with America. So this really matters. In fact, some economists estimate that India's GDP will drop by 0.1% by 2028 if Trump's tariffs actually get put into place. Trump also cares very little about priorities for India like climate change, which the president-elect sees as a hoax. And his top allies like Mike Waltz have called for America to remove troops from Japan and South Korea. Now, this decision could weaken the US alliance system in Asia, exactly when China is growing its military strength. Now, this is part of a broader trend in Trump's foreign policy vision, which involves America doing less and less abroad and pushing allies to do more and more. But at this point in time, it does run the risk of leaving America and its allies unprepared if China decides to follow an aggressive military policy in Asia. And that won't be in India's interest either. So while Trump's administration is staffed full of people considered to be pro-India, its actual impact on New Delhi will remain truly unknown. We'll have the next 4 years to find out how things will go. Thank you so much for watching Threadbare with me, Shashank Matu. You can catch us again next week on India Today Global